And anyway, so today, so we'll be talking about this Stephen Krashen's theory of language learning, and the theory or also hypothesis, as you can say. I kept it in parentheses, hypothesis, and so there are different hypotheses Stephen Krashen proposed, and Stephen Krashen has a long career in linguistics, and not only in linguistics, especially in the whole education sector, So he's one of the big giant, let's say, big shot for that matter, And if you're talking about second language, bilingual education, and all, and there are many things he has proposed later on, So today's class mainly talked about the 5 hypotheses Stephen Krashen proposed based on his different articles and different books. You see, he has written more than 500 articles, and there are many books he has produced, So, so from articles, from some books, the kind of gist what we could get, the real 5 hypotheses, and those 5 hypotheses today we'll be discussing. Okay, so now I think if we look at Stephen Krashen, so he did his PhD in linguistics from University of California in 1972, and somehow more than 486 publications. Almost now it must have crossed 500 publications, and most of these publications are in the field of second language acquisition, bilingual education, and reading. Reading later on, in the later phase, this Stephen Krashen proposed this reading method, So he's going for reading method, and especially voluntary reading method, And to learn a second language, he's saying that one has to read, and if you read more voluntarily, not kind of imposed way that your teacher is saying that you are reading, but let's say you started reading, whether it's a poem, it's a novel, short stories, or short stories and other things in the second language. So your language learning or language acquisition, so either whether in the comprehension level or as well as in the production level, you'll be very good, So nowadays he's emphasizing this reading method of especially. So Stephen Krashen introduced different hypotheses, and especially the second language acquisition or second language learning, mostly talking about the term acquisition is used, you see, and only for first language, and now we can understand that even acquisition can be used for second language as well. There is, and especially in the generative literature, many people that do not make this distinction between acquisition and learning. I think I told you that, and why is this so? Because we know that children also go through different phases of language acquisition. We talked about the milestones of language acquisition. Even the adults, if we're talking about, they also go through different stages of language acquisition, and so the kind of developing grammar we talk about when you talk about children, the same way we talk about the kind of developing grammar also, if we are talking about mainly for the adults learners as well, you see, and the kind of mistakes or errors committed by the children, the same kind of mistakes or errors also committed by the adults, you see. So there is this kind of phase, and so many, especially in the generative literature, many people do not make this kind of distinction between acquisition and learning. That's what related to second language acquisition, and including the acquisition learning hypothesis. So one hypothesis is acquisition learning hypothesis. The another is the monitor hypothesis. Another one is natural order hypothesis, the input hypothesis, and affective filter hypothesis. So these are the things today we'll be discussing, and as I already told you that Krashen promotes the use of free voluntary reading during the second language acquisition, which he says is the most powerful role we have in language education. So free voluntary reading during the second language acquisition. So then it's really very powerful tool to have in language education, whether, as I already told you, when I talk about comprehension and production and different things, it's pretty good. And now, this is where I was telling you that he is the one person, and so there are many linguists, especially supporting this kind of monolingual education or one language, one nation kind of policy. Do not look at multilingual education as a kind of cure for many things, let's say, and whether it's a cognitive development, cultural kind of upliftment. So there are many people. So Jill Stewart, one of the person, let's say, and aggressive article written there, Crash and Burn, in which she characterized Krashen as wedded into the moneyed interest of multi-million dollar of bilingual education industry. So that's what Jill Stewart and many people, let's say, that why bilingual education and or multilingual education for that matter. So many people. That's what I was telling you, supporting this monolingual education policy or one language, one nation kind of understanding. And, but we have understood later on, even in the psychological literature, cognitive literature also, we had seen that mainly the students, bilingual children or multilingual children, they perform better in compared to the monolingual children, you see. And when you talk about language, it's not only one language. When you talk about, let's say, one person knows 3 or 4 languages, that means the person knows 3 or 4 cultures and those norms, those etiquettes, and many other things. So even if you talk about the intelligent IQ of that particular person, I think it would be totally better. The way, let's say, we test IQ also, at times I question that, the whole kind of understanding of measuring IQ. So you have the questions to some extent, either questions are dominated by mainstream thoughts, let's say. You should measure IQ in a different way, let's say. And let's say a person, he is from village, and but you are asking that, let's say, some kind of computer related questions, let's say. He must not have seen or touched computer in his life, let's say, but you are asking those questions. So the whole system has to be questioned, in my understanding, in the IQ and other things also. Anyway, that's a different thing, but we had seen that, especially the how mainstream thoughts, let's say, prevails in different way also. So these are the things you can think about your own understanding, let's say. Nowadays, let's say our JNU admission policy has changed. Now we have switched to all that kind of, to some extent, this what you call tick mark, this so to say, what do you call
Objective, sir.
objective, sorry, I'm sorry, objective OMR, okay, OMR kind of things, just now what happened, you see, at times what happened, you do not understand somewhere what the subjective understanding of that particular person, what kind of grammatical mistakes the person can make also, you do not know also, let's say. And simply kind of cramming up certain things, and just at times they simply pass the test, and so there are whole things that has to be understood in a different manner, so that's what I'm saying. So there are people who have that kind of one language, one kind of policy based on mainstream civilizations. So they feel that, definitely they feel that crash and burn, because Krashen is talking about multilingual or bilingual education, for that matter, mainly bilingual education. And the word bilingual for linguistics also is not only 2 languages. When we use the word bilingual, is basically for either bi oblique multilingual. So this is where so many people, aggressive article, and many people somehow don't like the approach taken by him. So and continuing, Krashen wrote, that's what Krashen's counter argument, that without a serious, dedicated and organized campaign to explain and defend bilingual education at the national level, in a very short time, we'll have nothing left in nothing left to defend. And that's what, let's see, if you continue your mainstream civilization kind of approach, the mainstream civilization, why I'm not saying this English approach, because depending on different countries, different nations, what is going to happen, you are having a different kind of language, for that matter, different kind of imposition of different cultures. So let's say English, we know that how English is being imposed. At the same time, let's say in Indian setting, if you talk about, either it is Sanskrit in the form of Hindi, let's say. Somehow, if you talk about, let's say, different places in India also, it's not only about Hindi or Sanskrit. If you go to different states, somewhere state dominating languages, whether it is Oriya, whether it is Bangla, whether it is Assamese, whether it is Malayalam and other languages. So mainstream languages, let's say, to some extent, kind of a domination is there, and you know it very well, you see. So in defense, so that's what Krishna is saying. In a very short time, we will have nothing left to defend, and we had seen that how different languages, let's say, in the whole India, not only India, if you look at the whole world, I know that's ethnologue language reports. If you look at that, there are many languages are in the verge of extinction, and so somehow we have to take care of those languages. We need to give support to those languages, and especially that bilingual education, what he is proposing, and so that's what. So we'll continue, and Krashen in many of his books, in different articles, he'll talk about these different theories and in support of this bilingual education and so on. Okay, and so. And the last point, distinction between hypothesis and theory. And I think today, initially, we have already talked about the distinction between hypothesis and theory. Okay. And so Krashen's theory and Krashen theory evolved in late 1970s. Mainly, he started working after late 1960s, and somehow the works are coming into picture. And as I already told you, that he had series of articles, different articles, more than 500 articles, 486 I mentioned, and then in different cases he had refined his theory, revised his theory, and expanded his ideas in the early 1980s in series of books. And just I'm mentioning just 2 or 3 books. You'll find ample number of books, articles, as already I mentioned. So this is one second language acquisition and second language learning. Principles and practice in second language acquisition, the natural approach, language acquisition in the classroom, and the input hypothesis, issues and implications. So mostly the kind of hypothesis today we'll be discussing. So some of these things will definitely come into picture. The input hypothesis and the natural word order, natural approach, principles, and there itself will find some second language acquisition, second language learning, that thing as well, distinction between acquisition and learning, and so some of these things. So these mainly Krashen based a general theory around a set of 5 basic hypotheses. So one is the acquisition learning hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, the natural order hypothesis, and the input hypothesis. And the next one is the affective filter hypothesis. So acquisition hypothesis, monitor hypothesis, the natural order hypothesis, input hypothesis, and affective filter hypothesis. So these 5 hypotheses, today we'll be discussing, and not only about, let's say, what is this hypothesis is about, but also try to see that whether Stephen Krashen is successful at giving this hypothesis, or maybe kind of attack on Stephen Krashen's hypothesis, that whether this hypothesis is successful or not, you see. So try to see. And that's what my whole approach is, that, and I have been telling you from the very beginning, do not take it as a kind of ready-made packages, because applied linguistics is not, it doesn't give you any ready-made kind of solutions. So whatever is being told, try to question that, whoever is the person, whether it is X, Y, and Z, Z, whoever is the person, whether it's Stephen Krashen, Noam Chomsky, or whoever for that matter, you see. And that's what the main understanding. And this thing, it could be the religious understanding, the orthodoxy or fundamentalist understanding, you can see all that things, happening here and there, in your household or somewhere else as well. So the thing is that do not take things as kind of taking it for granted kind of approach. Try to question things, you see. And so we'll also try to see this hypothesis, questioning this hypothesis. Whatever he is saying, we're not going to accept easily, and that's what our whole understanding. And JNU is also one place somewhere, some of our students are also like that, you see. Even you are not like that. Once you come to JNU, you become like that, You try to question, and that as a result, many people, they don't like it, that, why these people are questioning, why these people are unnecessarily kind of wasting taxpayers' money, They should really read. They should be inside the library. Even the library is not open, you see. So they have that kind of understanding. So anyway, so this is where we'll try to see both, and so the first hypothesis here from our, let's say, from our list, the acquisition learning hypothesis. And I think this part is already clear to you to some extent. We have already discussed this acquisition learning hypothesis. Briefly, let's say I already mentioned today in the beginning, but again, maybe in other classes also. And so what is this acquisition learning hypothesis? And acquisition refers to the subconscious process, identical in all important ways to the process children utilize in acquiring their first language. That's what you all know, that when you talk about acquisition, we're already talking about the subconscious process, and especially we talk about the first language acquisition. That's what we know that, okay? In other words, acquisition is the result of natural interaction with the language by meaningful communication. So natural interaction, the natural setting we always talk about, So it's not the unnatural setting, but or artificial setting, but it's totally natural. So children, they acquire language naturally, and whether you want to teach language or not, if the children are there, the kind of initial exposure is given, they're definitely going to learn or acquire a particular language, you see. So that's what natural environment, that kind of exposure is really important, which sets in motion developmental process akin to those underlined in first language acquisition, okay? So, and now, and on the other hand, learning refers to the conscious process that results in knowing about language. So knowing about language, that means somewhere you have the unconscious or subconscious process, let's say, but somewhere you're trying to know the language, and so this is where the second language things come, knowing about language, This is, and learning is the result of classroom experience in which the learner is made to focus on form and to learn about linguistic rules of the target language. So we have target language and the focus made to focus on form. And form, in we're talking about the linguistic forms. We're talking about the structures, let's say, whether it's the phonetic form, morphological form, syntactic forms, or whichever the forms, for that matter, and linguistic rules of that particular language, That's what the whole second language teaching or learning will be, kind of, so students or the learners will be engaged with this kind of things, you see. And you know that whether you have learned English, Hindi, or whichever the foreign language or the second language, so you know that, so that's what. So now, related to this, developing competence in a language by using it in a natural communicative situation, that point is already discussed. As available while learning languages we hear in our homes and neighborhood. That's what the natural environment we talked about. We have a feel for correctness. Grammatical sentences sound right or feel right, and errors feel wrong, even if we do not consciously know what rule was violated. And this is really interesting. Let's say somewhere when you know a language, that means we have the the competence. We talk about the competence of the language. Let's say whether the person is educated, semi-educated, illiterate, and not, even if a sentence is grammatically wrong, the person can tell you that yes, the sentence is wrong, and they may not tell you explicitly why the sentence is wrong, what kind of grammatical rules are violated, but they'll definitely tell you the sentence is wrong, So we have a feel for correctness, whether it is sound right or, And that's what it's really interesting, and so you know that thing, So acquisition include implicit learning, informal learning, or natural learning. These are other terms he used in different places: in implicit learning, informal learning, or natural learning. You see, and the non-technical language, and in non-technical language, acquisition is picking up a language, and this is where a non-technical term. Many people, I think, one of your friends also said that she or he is very very interested, learning languages, So, and this is also many people, they say that he is very good at picking up a language, picking up a language as if like picking up some objects or something, and so that's what the non-technical language we are talking about, picking up a language. Some people are very good, and so, but we do not pick up language, the way we pick up other things, so language cannot be picked up because our understanding is different. But the non-technical term is used also, so. On the other hand, learning, developing competence in a language by learning its rules and vocabulary through explicit teaching in a classroom setting. Explicit teaching, we know that how this explicit teaching goes on, goes and in the classroom setting, and conscious knowledge of a second language and knowing the rules, being aware of them, or being able to talk about them. So teachers will ask you that, how it is formed and all that kind of things, And in non-technical terms, learning is knowing about a language, and known to most people, grammar or rules, So knowing about a language, if you're talking about learning. Some synonyms include formal knowledge of a language or explicit learning, Krashen, So that's what, these are the things. What I'm summarizing, it's from Krashen's different works, from different books, from articles, and there other things, okay? So, and now, related to this, let's say acquisition and learning hypothesis, what is being discussed, let's say, and now if you talk about acquisition and learning hypothesis, and that's what the critics part comes in. So the hypothesis has been highly influential. It still remains a source of much debate today. Even if you talk about acquisition and learning, many people in linguistics, they make distinction between acquisition and learning. Many people, I'm telling you. And especially in the generative literature and other places, many people somehow, because as I already told you, the developmental grammar, so that's the reason, one of the reasons, and because the way children, they acquire language, there are certain stages. Also the adults, they also go through the same kind of stages. And that's the reason, one of the reasons that many people do not make the distinction between acquisition and learning, And so, but so the basic premise is that language acquisition on the one hand and learning on the other hand are separate processes. So that's the basic premise, And acquisition and learning, you're trying to make kind of distinction. And learning cannot turn into acquisition. That is, the language knowledge acquired or learned by these different routes cannot eventually become integrated into a unified whole. Krashen has been criticized for this vague definition of what constitutes conscious versus subconscious processes, as they're very difficult to test in practice. Now you talked about subconscious process, you talked about conscious process, let's say. So which process is conscious, which process is unconscious or subconscious for that matter? And if linguistics is a scientific discipline, and whichever the discipline for that matter, you have to test it. So on the basis of some kind of assumptions, you are saying that acquisition is a subconscious process and learning is a conscious process. But how do you test it? What kind of experiments you have conducted? For that, Krashen do not have any particular kind of answer, you see. So this is where, that's where the critics part come into picture, and even the generative traditions also would question the same thing, as I was talking about the developing grammar and all, so other argument also, okay. How can we tell when a learner's production is the result of a conscious process and when it is not? Another question, that whether the learner's production, let's say production we're talking about language production here, okay, or articulation for that matter, is a result of conscious process or when it is not. Can you tell it that this is the result of conscious process, and this is the result of subconscious process or unconscious process. What? Can you make a distinction? Krashen will have no answer for that. Okay, so this is where the critics got into come into picture. Now, the next hypothesis, what we call the monitor hypothesis, again based on Krashen's those articles, those books, and all. So the monitor hypothesis, and what this monitor is all about, and so the monitor hypothesis, this hypothesis states that how acquisition and learning are used in production and second language performance. In production or in second language performance. Our ability to produce utterances in another language comes from our acquired competence, from our subconscious knowledge. See, try to understand that. So the competence is coming from basically the subconscious knowledge, you see. An acquisition initiates the speaker's utterance and is responsible for fluency. So saying that if it is acquisition, language acquisition, so definitely the person will have good fluency, utterances, and responsible for fluency. But you see, fluency, it's not only about acquisition. There must be different factors which are also involved for fluency. Fluency, let's say, when you do not have any thoughts in your mind, how can you be fluent? You have to have certain thoughts in your mind. That's another important. So you cannot just simply say that because of acquisition, fluency comes into picture. There are many other factors, and fluency is somewhere you can see in the performance level, let's say. Okay, so that's what I'm just trying to criticize that point. You see. See, in learning conscious knowledge serves only as an editor or a monitor. So what is happening in learning conscious knowledge serves only as an editor or monitor. So what happened there, it was a subconscious knowledge, but when language learning takes place, when language learning takes place, we have the conscious knowledge, and that conscious knowledge serves only as an editor or monitor. So this is the same thing. Either you can say monitor or editor. Okay. So the monitor hypothesis states that learning has only one function, and that it is as monitor or editor, and that learning comes into play only make changes in the form of our utterance after it has been produced by the acquired system. So something like it is produced by the acquired systems. So the monitor will make kind of let's say correction or the kind of changes in the utterances, and so this is where now. So two conditions need to be met in order to use the monitor. One, so what are these two conditions? The performer must be concerned about correctness. The performer must know the rule. So these are two conditions. So the performer must be concerned about correctness, that okay, what is correct and what is not correct. And also the performer or what we talk about, learner, let's say, must know the rule. But in general, both these conditions are difficult to meet. So now if you say that, especially in the second language learning, the performer must be concerned about correctness. Since he is learning the language, he doesn't know whether he is making mistakes or not. And the performer must know the rule. Also, even if you talk about the second language, let's say, many cases the performer or the learners, they do not know the rule. Many cases, let's say, whether it is a structural linguistic structure rules, or let's say sociolinguistics or pragmatics level rules. There are many things the performers, they do not know. So what we are talking about, the monitor is there to correct you, and so it's not necessarily the case, you see. And the learning system performs the role of the monitor or an editor that acts in planning, editing, correcting, function when the L2 learner has sufficient time at disposal and knows the rules of L2. The role of the monitor is only to correct deviations from the normal speech and to give a speech a more polished appearance, so trying to give a kind of polished appearance, you see. And the monitor system is user specific, overused, underused, and optimal use. So this monitor system, especially the editor system, at times what happens, it is overused. People at times they think about it more and more. Am I making kind of mistakes? At times they do not make use of the monitor also. And at times some people they use this optimally. So this is where we'll have to see that if it is happening underused, optimal use, or to some extent overused. So what is going to happen? You see. So Krashen used the concept of monitor in order to explain individual difference. So why Krashen brought this hypothesis, especially monitor hypothesis or the editor hypothesis for that matter? So why is this so? Because he tried to look at the individual differences in learners. You see, every learner has kind of differences in second language learning. Let's say a whole set of group learning second language, whether it's Spanish or Japanese or Hindi for that matter. You see that some people will perform better and some people will perform okay or average. So why is this so? So he brought this concept of monitor in order to explain the individual differences in learners, you see. And he suggests that it is possible to find monitor overusers who do not like making mistakes and are therefore constantly checking what they produce against the conscious stock of rules they possess. Their speech is consequently very halting and non-fluent. Try to understand that. So the people, especially in the second language learning process, if they are thinking, I'm making lots of mistakes, and constantly checking whatever he is saying and trying to check whether it is correct or whether it is not. So they are basically monitor over users. And if someone, let's say, uses its monitor editor too much, so his speech will be, let's say, halting or non-fluent. So over users, they do not perform better, you see, especially in the second language learning things. Try to understand that the under users and optimal users also. So that's what I always tell, and many people, I always say this thing that don't hesitate, you see. We all make mistakes. And whatever the mistakes, whether it's a grammatical mistakes and other types of mistakes. And if you do not make mistakes, how do you know that whether it's a mistake or not mistake? And making that mistakes, you learn. But make sure you do not make the same mistakes again and again. This is what we always say that, So, but all the time if you're thinking that, you see, if I make these mistakes, what this my friends or maybe my teachers, what they'll think about me, that kind of things, and there are different kind of hesitation factors and other factors. I had seen in the class also, there are many good students because of different reasons they do not speak. But when they write pretty well, they write well, But they have some other, so some people are introvert, some people are extrovert. Not necessarily the people who speak more or can express things better, they know better. Not necessarily. I had seen it, and you also know that there are people who are good orators. They have this oratory skills, but that doesn't mean that they are knowledgeable more in compared to one person who speaks less. So I have an experience, let's say, in a seminar or conference, and I'm just naming the person, Professor Bernard Comrie. I do not know whether you have heard of Bernard Comrie, one of the big language typologists, So Bernard Comrie, so he visited our university once, and so we had that international conference. And throughout the conference, and especially in Indians have the habit of showing off. Let's say if they know a little bit, they'll try to show up to the whole world, entire world, that he or she is the one knows everything in the world, and that's the supremacy. The kind of India wants to know. We had seen that, and in the different news or TV channels also, So what I'm saying is that the person, such a great scholar, stalwart in linguistics, and so I was just listening to, not listening. He was not presenting. I was just listening to all those paper presenters. Not even a single word he spoke. But when it came to his, then after the end of the session, he had to give comments. You see, so one person he told that Bernard Comrie is like a sponge. He like soaks like anything, like talking about each and minute details. Let's say, so then his expertise come into picture when he was commenting on the paper. But some of us like to try to show our knowledge. We will intervene. The turn taking takes place. There is a term, social linguistic terms. We talk about turn taking. The other person did not finish his word or sentences, and you jump into conversation. You see, many Americans and Europeans are especially very good if you're talking about the turn taking. They wait for their turn, but in Indian scenario, they don't wait. This is simply barge into. So again, another social linguistics features, and anyway, so that's the different thing, So what I'm saying, so somewhere the kind of your monitor, if it is overused, you are using it too much. So as a result, and correcting that whether you are making the sentence is right or not. What other people will think about me and all that kind of things. So your language learning, the kind of language you will speak, your speech will definitely be halting or non-fluent for that matter. Okay, so this is where. On the other hand, monitor under users do not seem to care very much about the errors they make. For them, speed and fluency are more important. So there are people they don't care about, let's say, to some extent, errors, whatever the grammatical errors and other errors. They said, okay, let me try to speak the language fluently. So that is what more important. And especially in the communicative approach of language teachings, also if you look at this, the recent approach after 1970s, people introduce these communicative methods. We'll talk about communicative methods of language teaching. So they are more here. You have to be fluent. Even in some people, they use, let's say, some grammatical mistakes or errors are there. That's okay, no problem. But fluency is there, and fluency is really important. So the monitor hypothesis, and I have already told you some kind of try to criticize monitor hypothesis. And again, so monitor does not operate all the time, and given enough time, when a focus on form is important for learners, and when learners know the grammatical rule needed, they might make use of monitor in order to consciously modify the output produced by the acquired system. Okay. So, needless to say, the pressures and demands of conversing in the second language in real time do not often allow for such monitoring to take place. And that's lots of pressures and demand also, you see, and do not have that kind of time also in the real time for that matter, you see. And Krashen's monitor hypothesis has been criticized for that reason, and also for that fact that attempts to test its predictions have been unsuccessful. Even the predictions, what it's been predicted, is basically unsuccessful. And even talking about the taste also, again, to some extent, can you reach there, especially in the mind or in the brain level also, because the whole cognitive things what we are talking about. So the problem with such claims, even though they might have some intuitive appeal, is that they are at present impossible to test empirically. So can you test it empirically? The kind of psychological, the cognitive test developed by linguists and other practitioners. So it is very difficult to test empirically. So that's what the problem, the kind of critiques come into picture. So how do we know when a learner is consciously applying a rule or not? So again another questions with how do we know that when a learner is consciously applying a rule and or unconsciously applying a rule? So another. In other words, whether the source of the rule that has been applied is the acquired system or the learned system. So, especially you talk about Krashen, he tried to devise this kind of make distinction between acquired and the learned system, you see. And as a result, If it is acquired, then the fluency is, let's say, is more. And if it is learned, the fluency, not necessarily it is more, but depending on users and over users and under users and optimal users, So what are the source of the rule that has been applied in, whether it's from the acquired system or from the learned system, we do not know exactly. So which rule is applied and which rule is not applied, we do not know exactly. So this is basically that's what the hypothesis we talked about. So the to test this hypothesis, it's very very and even within that hypothesis there are many other hypotheses as well. And lots of questions there remains, you see. So and again there is another hypothesis, the third one here in our list, the natural order hypothesis. And what is this natural order hypothesis? So natural order hypothesis, again 1967, Krashen acquired the rules of language in a predictable order, some rules tending to come early and others late. So we acquire the rules of language in a predictable order. So there is a predictable order that this is going to happen and this is going to happen later. So Krashen is saying that, you see. The order does not appear to be determined solely by formal simplicity, and there is evidence that it is independent of the order in which rules are taught in language classes. So he is just, to support his hypothesis, he is saying that somehow whether it is taught in the independently in the like classes or not, it doesn't matter. But the rules, let's say, there is a predictable order, there is a natural order. That's what he is saying. So now let's say when someone acquires a new language, some grammatical structure are acquired earlier than others. So some structure are acquired earlier than others. The L1 of the speaker, age of acquisition, amount of quality of input and exposure are irrelevant for this sequence. Try to understand that. He says that there is a natural order, and as a result, some rules are acquired early and some rules are acquired later on. So these are not the factors, whether the L1 of the speaker, mother tongue basically, or L1, whichever the L1 we're talking about, age of acquisition, amount of quality of input and exposure, it doesn't matter because there is a natural order. So now, again, he's saying that there is a natural order. Now, if you look at the natural order, Krashen also doesn't say that what is this natural order is all about. You need to tell that, yes, this is the natural order is happening in this language, and not only about one language. Since you are trying to look at languages, not only one language, let's say from UG perspective, all the languages in the world, universal grammar perspective, you have to provide a kind of evidence for that, what is the natural order. So, however, based on this, Krashen does not suggest a particular grammatical sequence in language teaching pedagogy. So you do not have, doesn't suggest that. He said that there is a natural order, but doesn't suggest so much, And now, again, the next hypothesis, what is our hypothesis? The input hypothesis or comprehensive hypothesis, the comprehensive input hypothesis. The input hypothesis or comprehensive input hypothesis. What is this? The comprehensive input hypothesis. The input hypothesis claims that humans acquire language in only one way, by understanding messages or by receiving comprehensible input. So all of us receive some kind of comprehensible input, at the time of language acquisition. It claims that we move along the developmental continuum by receiving comprehensive input. So all of us, let's say, and we progress along the natural order. So the natural order he is talking about, though there is no clarity, but we progress along the natural order by understanding input that contains structure at our next stage. Structures that are a bit beyond our current level of competence. Let's say beyond our current level of competence. So that structure we can understand, you see. So if a learner's current competence is, let's say, I, then comprehensible input is, let's say, I plus 1. or if the next step in the developmental sequence. So that means later, slowly and gradually, so that's what we learn, slowly and gradually. That's what if the learner's current competence is I, then comprehensible input is I plus 1. And then let's say input which is either too simple, already acquired, or too complex, let's say Z plus 2 or 3, 4, 2, 3, 4 will not be useful for acquisition, you see. So we have to have that kind of comprehensible input. So Prakshan views that input hypothesis as central to his model of second language acquisition when he's talking about second language learning or acquisition. So this input hypothesis is central to his model of second language acquisition. And speaking is a result of acquisition and not its cause. Speech cannot be taught directly but emerge on its own as a result of building competence via comprehensible input. So the speech we are talking about, let's say, speech cannot be taught directly but emerges on its own as a result of building competence via comprehensible input. And that's what, based on this hypothesis, input hypothesis, later on he's saying that, and I talked about this reading method later on, the reading method, because, and that is also to some extent, it's also true that you have to read, let's say, and if you read more, that means your vocabulary and understanding, and there are many other things, let's say, also develops also. And even talking about this speaking or the fluency parts also, maybe initially you may have problem, but slowly and gradually you can take over all that kind of things, you see. So, and if input is understood and there is enough of it, the necessary grammar is automatically provided. And so that's another, so if input is understood and there is enough of it, the necessary grammar is automatically provided. So the language teacher need not attempt deliberately to teach the next structure along the natural order. It will be provided in just the right quantities and automatically reviewed if the student receives a sufficient amount of comprehensible input. So they can understand that if they have already that sufficient amount of comprehensible input. Okay, and this again, as I told you, that all these hypotheses, you have some vague, and there are lots of problem at times it's imprecise. So the input hypothesis that Prakshan talked about has been frequently criticized for being vague and imprecise. How do we determine the level of Z and let's say level 1 plus 1, I plus 1? We don't know. How do we determine that this level and that level, and what kind of comprehensible input we are talking about, So this is, again, this is the question, and the theory becomes impossible to verify as no independently testable definitions are given of what comprehensible input actually consists of, and therefore of how it might relate to acquisition. So this is where the problem, so even the comprehensible input, nor of course does the theory specify the internal workings of the language acquisition device where acquisition actually takes place. This remains an opaque black box. So you're talking about the kind of language acquisition device and the internal workings of the language acquisition device, the LED, and where acquisition actually takes place. And it remains an opaque, black box. It's totally unclear, And so this is where the fourth hypothesis and the next hypothesis, the hypothesis number 5, and so the affective filter hypothesis, So the affective filter hypothesis, and this is where the hypothesis, and comprehensible input is necessary for acquisition, but it is not sufficient. That's what, moving to the next, comprehensible input is necessary for acquisition, but it's not sufficient. We talked about comprehensible input, which is not sufficient. So the performer needs to be open to the input. So he or she needs to be open to the input. And the affective filter is a mental block that prevents acquirers from fully utilizing the comprehensible input they receive for language acquisition. When the affective filter is up, The acquirer may understand what he hears or reads, but the input will not reach the LED. That's the language acquisition device we talked about. This occurs when the acquirer is unmotivated, lacking a self-confidence, or anxious, or when he is on the defensive, when he considers that language class to be place where his weakness will be revealed. I was telling you some of the factors you see. So, so the affective filter, the filter we are talking about, when the acquirer is unmotivated, and in many cases, let's say it happens, you see, and um, we do have this unmotivated things. There are different reasons mainly for language learning, because most of the questions hypothesis what we are talking about today is related to second language learning. And see, there are different reasons for language learning. The reasons for language learning, I think I told you that there could be instrumental motivation of language learning. There could be integrative motivation for language learning. Instrumental is for the sake of getting a certificate, you see, and you're trying to learn the particular language. And let's say for some people, they are learning the language because they want to get a job, and also trying to make their career in that particular language. And let's say in a place like JNU, try to understand that in JNU there are many foreign languages are taught. I think you know that, and JNU is one of the very, I think one of the best institute in India where these foreign languages are taught. Let's say, and somewhere many students, let's say in BA, they come to JNU, and there are three options. So at the time of filling up the form, you have three options. Option, let's say this option, either French, Spanish, German, or Chinese, Japanese, Russian. So let's say one of the student, let's say he tried to, let's say his aspiration is to learn uh, Spanish, and his third option was Russian. And as a result, he did not get chance in Spanish, but got in Russian. And somehow, after attending classes, lectures, and there are many other things, he thinks that, oh, Russian is not my cup of tea. And there are many things, so the acquirer maybe is unmotivated because of many other reasons, either job and many other things. And also in linguistics, also I think once I was talking about, so there are different factors, jobs and other as well, you see. So it happens, you see, this occurs when the acquirer is unmotivated, lacking a self-confidence. It's not only unmotivated, at times self-confidence. You think that, in your place, you are, let's say, the state, let's say, rank, talk about your university, you got gold medal in your university or in your college. And when you come to JNU, you see that there are many that kind of rank holders, many smart people are there, and so as a result, many people, they think that, okay, they have kind of lacking kind of self-confidence, and at times people are also anxious or defensive, There are many other reasons. That's some of the reasons I'm simply saying, So when he considers that language class to be a place where his weaknesses will be revealed. So when he starts speaking, that his weaknesses will be revealed, and that's so. So the affective filter, what this affective filter is, what is doing, and so when the affective filter is down, so there is affective filter, and that filter is down, the acquirer is not concerned with the possibility of failure in language acquisition. And when he considers himself to be potential member of the group speaking the target language. So if affective filter is somewhere, let's say, up, let's say, the anxiety level will be also up. So your affective filter should be down to some extent. You should not be concerned about your failure, your mistakes, your errors. I think I already told you that, you see. And when, let's say, if you're speaking English or whichever the language for that matter, try to speak with confidence, you see. And because everybody has a different kind of ideologue for that matter, you see. Yes, we have to speak whichever the language we speak with neutralized accent, try to speak with English or whichever the language with neutralized accent, try to minimize that. But let's say all the times if you're thinking about this, the way I speak, people may think that I come from this place or that place, and my identity will be revealed, or something, one way or other. Or at times you try to fake your accent also, whether it's a British accent or American accent, and whichever the accent, and it also at times it sounds so funny also. And you also see that Indians trying to mimic American variety or India, British variety in Indian setting. Is somebody speaking, you just look at, who is this person faking accent. We understand that, the whole thing, we understand that, you see. So I remember one of my colleague, she was there in Spain, and some kind of scholarship, and she came back and then started speaking and with that particular accent, and we used to look at that person, you see. I'm not saying that, and it happens, you see. And slowly and gradually, and so this happens basically. So one should not be too concerned about all that kind of factors, you see. And your affective filter should not be too up, so Krashen claims that if we have high motivation, high self-confidence, and a low level of anxiety, we will be better equipped to learn an L2. So you have to high motivation, high self-confidence. You have to have a confidence, and it's not only about language acquisition. I think the confidence factor comes, in wherever, and whatever the thing you do, you have to have confidence and self-confidence. So, and the low level of anxiety factor. If you are anxious, too much, and so nobody can do anything, And let's say the questions, the answers, and even after that, if your anxiety level is too much, high, you cannot answer the question, you see. And so these are the really, some of the very good reasons, let's say. And the way we generally teach language, we tend to raise the anxiety levels of learners. The affective filter is thus raised, obstructing comprehensible input to become intake. Try to understand that. And the whole teaching methods, if you look at that, that's what, why Krashen is also successful. Even after lots of critics coming into picture, his theory, his hypothesis is really, let's say, caught the attention of millions, let's say, millions language learners, second language learners. And that's exactly the points you see. So their affective filter is thus raised, obstructing. So why I'm saying is that if you look at the whole language teaching methods, second language teaching methods, so it is programmed in such a way that your anxiety levels are going to be somehow raised. And as a result, and it's not only about language teaching, it's the whole teaching methods, and in India and other places also, you see that. I can tell you that even, let's say, my daughter appearing for examination, online examination, I can't tell you, and you guys, did not switch on your video or audio for that matter. For this, class 1 or 2 kids, they have to switch on their audio, they have to switch on their video, even make sure parents are not nearby, and constantly monitoring. 4 or 5 teachers are there, they're looking at the screen, constantly monitoring. And parents are excited, kind of anxiety of the parents are, let's say, also it's raised, not only parents as well as the students, let's say, the little learners if we're talking about. So the whole way it has been trained, it has been taught. If you talk about the teaching methods, it's not only about language teaching, the whole teaching methods, as you like, still we're same in the behavioral tendency. I'm talking about. Language is being seen or viewed as a kind of behavior, or the whole other thing also, that you can let's say imitate things. Even if you look at the books, the way books are written, the whole structure, the design is in the same manner, you see. So so that's what so unless input gets converted into intake, no learning will take place. So that inputs gets converted into intake, then the learning will definitely take place. No learning will take place. So this is, we must therefore make every possible effort to lower the affective filter of learners. So we have to lower the affective filter of learners. So we should not raise that the filter, rather lower it. So and especially if you are a teacher, because you are in the applied linguistics course, and I consider you, let's say, not today, after 1 year, 2 years, or after 5 years, whenever, let's say, you will be a teacher, or not teacher, let's say, maybe in other job, whatever the job you do. Last year the students whom I taught, some of them have already joined in different companies. I think I shared with you 4 or 5 of them joined in Google and other companies, software companies also. So so the main thing is that try to understand this, you see, and somewhere, even if you are a teacher for that matter, do not make the environment as a kind of too much anxiety levels. Students are also frightened. Let's say you are a boss, and looking at you, your whoever working with you or under your direction, they are so frightened. Try to make that learning, whatever the environment, amicable environment, you see, and in that particular environment we learn a lot. Otherwise, I think I do not find any kind of difference between, let's say, those animals, whether it's a lion or something, a lion and other things. So try to make that particular environment amicable, and so that the anxiety level is little down, the affective filter is down, and in that particular level we learn, mutually. That's what my whole intention also in applied linguistics course also. Let's say we all are facing problems these days, talking about this COVID situation and all. But every class, if I start telling you, yeah, I do not mind whatever you are doing, if you do not have a very good internet connection, then do not take my course. We all are facing this problem, and there are many other things some teachers they do. So the main point here is that we have to have that kind of level, amicable understanding, amicable environment to some extent. That's what. So now let's say we discussed about this more 5 hypotheses and evidence in support of this hypothesis, mainly input hypothesis. It's some kind of phenomena I'll try to tell you, and then we'll wind up today's class. And if you have some questions, let's say, we can also discuss these things. And so evidence in support of the input hypothesis and some phenomena and the kind of research, let's say, done, let's say. And the 2 things are important for language learning: the kind of input and the kind of environments. That's what we understand. The 2 things are really important for L2 learning: the kind of language input, the kind of environments. And you will see that somewhere later on also in the environment, when I'm talking about different environment, let's say in JNU, if you're talking about why JNU is successful, let's say. Try to compare why I'm not just eulogizing or praising JNU language learning environment. Why is it so to some extent successful in India? The reason is that, let's say, in JNU we have, let's say, number 1, in second language teaching, very good, well qualified teachers, number 1. And those teachers who are teaching those foreign languages, they have done their either, let's say, whatever the degree, but they have also spent enough time in those countries. Let's say Korea, if you're talking about, or Japanese or Chinese and all. So the teachers have spent enough time, in those, they have gone to those places. And one thing I will also tell you that what happens is that even students also, so they get some scholarship, and they also go to those places and they come back, let's say. So we have this also exchange program. From this country to that country, we have some exchange program. And other thing I can tell you that some faculty members from those countries are teaching, not only Indian teaching, Korean or Japanese or something, some faculty members from those countries. And we have this relationship, embassy with embassy and all. So every alternate days somewhere or other, so you are getting the exposure of the native like environments. So, and Delhi is being the epicenter, kind of epicenter center of many things, let's say. So as a result, the foreigners, they keep on coming and visiting, and many students who are learning those second languages, and side by side they go for this what do you say, tourist guide, to guide the tourist in different places in addition to what they're learning. So let's say some tourists from Russia came to India. So some of this whoever learning foreign second language, some students, they also go and earn lots of money. So in land, what is happening, why I'm telling you this thing, that what is, so the immersion method we talk about. Immersion method, I think you understand immersion method, that somehow students and the learners are sent to that native like environment. Sent to the native like environment, and then let's say with exposure, kind of interaction with the people, and then, but the immersion method is not successful also. If you talk about, let's say, someone not knowing the rules or linguistic structure or the theory for that matter, have gone to Korea and spent 1 year or 2 years, even maybe have not, he or she, you do not know whether he has learned Korean or not. But here what is happening, you have a theory in different levels, talking about the listening level, ALS, WR, writing, speaking, all level. Interpretations are also taught, and also literature, lots of literature are also taught, and then you are sent to those places with particular kind of scholarship and all, and with different kind of projects are being assigned, to the students, and also, so those students really, they do really well, especially in JNU. So the kind of environments we are talking about, and the kind of language input also, and here the language input, the kind of scenario, I think I have a paper here, maybe you can download the paper. I talked about Korean, and the whole language teaching, language learning method, especially in JNU. Did a survey in JNU, and then focusing on Korean language learning teaching methods. What are the things that the teachers do? Why is it successful? I have a paper, so if you are interested, you can read that paper as well. So, so this is evidence supporting the input hypothesis, some kind of phenomena. We had seen that the caregiver talk, foreigner talk, and teacher talk, that Madhab we had talked about, and these are characterized by simplification of the linguistic code. And if you talk about those caregiver or madris, so simplification of the linguistic code, simple word order, common vocabulary item, paraphrase, and the other idiomatic. So there are many other things, let's say. So language, you can have simple word order, some kind of common vocabulary item, paraphrase, the idiomatic phrases also, and also the idiomatic phrases to some extent. If you look at, there are many idiomatic phrases, or proverbial phrases. If you want to paraphrase those things, you cannot. So the same meaning may not be, there in that particular. So a little learning is a dangerous thing. If you just make it dangerous thing is a little learning, you cannot make it that thing, So there are many other things are happening. We need to know those, and so effects are positive or negative. So comprehensive input that is little beyond the learner's linguistic competence. So to some extent, yes, we need to provide comprehensible input. So the input which that is little beyond the learner's linguistic competence, yes, to some extent is fine. Oversimplification of linguistic code might have a negative effect on the L2 learner's progress. So what is happening, if you talk about the language one, the adults that try to speak in front of the children in a caregiver talk, the mothers we talk about, what is that? I think you remember those examples. So instead of a nin, there's a ninni, khichdi, and let's say stroll, ghummi in Hindi I'm talking about. So let's say this oversimplification of the linguistic code, especially if it's a L2 learner, somebody tries to speak with them in that manner, so definitely it's going to have a kind of negative effect on the L2 learner's progress. Because L2 learners, mostly if we talk about the L2 learners, they are adult, you see, and their also brain development have already taken place in compared to the children, brain development. Also, if we talk about the physiology of the vocal tract or the our organs and all, and so if someone starts doing the same thing, so that's not going to happen. So it is going to have a kind of negative effect on the especially language learners, you see. And natural environments, so language learning environments. Learning L2 is the most, you know, in the host country or in the immersion program. I think I told you that immersion program, especially in the host country where the language is spoken. Let's say Korea, Korean. If you can speak Korean, especially in Korea, immersion program, and let's say learning Hindi. So why not from India and especially Hindi belt and or maybe Bangla from that kind of community, Bengal. And the focus is on the communication, natural environment, help to break down the social and cultural barriers, enhance communication. So this is our that kind of so natural environments, and other is the formal environments, and L2 learning is in classroom situation or any situation where prescribed course is followed in formal setting. Drills, translation, grammar, this allow for learning explicit rules. It caters to individual learning strategies. Adults prefer to structured language learning in the initial stages. So, in compared to the children, children may not like the structured language learning, but somehow adults, they like the structured language learning, you see. And the other kind of classroom situation, whether you like it or not, it is prescribed course in a particular kind of formal setting, whether it is JNU, whether it is IFLU and Delhi University, whichever the language, second language you are learning, there is a prescribed syllabus for that, and drills, that kind of drilling practices, translation, grammar, the translation method, the whole translation method. We'll talk about this. I think this class may be a little difficult for some of you to understand and follow me. I can understand that because there are many things. Let's say I'm trying to summarize this. There are many things need to be explained later on. Let's say I'm saying translation grammar or translation grammar translation method. So what is this grammar translation method? Many of you may not know or explain it properly. So because of that, there are many other terms. Let's say may not be understood for you. But anyway, if there are some things, we can come back to this Stephen Krashen's this whole hypothesis later on. Once I introduce the language teaching methods, that in the next unit, and we can discuss that part as well. You see, so so how can we make our language learning more effective? Second language learning passes through many stages, and so how can help our L2 learners to be effective in L2 learning? Provide. So this is where. So though comprehensible input the kind of hypothesis was kind of challenged or criticized by many, but even after that we understand that that yes, we need to provide comprehensible input to the language learners, and even if you look at the whole later on communicative language teaching methods, to try to provide comprehensible input to the learners, you see. So the words in the sentence that are meaningful for them, isolated words or phrases without context, are not much of use. So why is it so? Try to understand that. So the grammar translation method, what is happening with the grammar translation method or the way language is learned, you try to see there are many teachers, or they will simply say, okay, this is the word and this is the meaning. This is the word and this is the meaning. There's a dog is dog, and dog, and there's a cat and all. So the word is used in isolation. The words or sentences are not used in context. So for us, let's say, understanding the whole comprehensible input hypothesis or communicative, method kind of things, you see, the latest development. So we'll try to get into that meaning part, and we're not looking into words into isolation, but looking at it in the context. So if you look at in the context, so you really get the comprehensible input things, you see. So so natural method, he also talked about natural method. So let's say pick up pencil, open your book. So all that kind of with natural method. We'll talk about natural method later on, And so let's say there is a pencil. So in the classroom, the teacher with kind of demo, the learner is there. Okay, this is a pencil. Pick up the pencil. This is a notebook. Open your notebook. So also show that. Okay, open your notebook. Or I open my notebook. So with demo and all, So we'll talk about that natural method later on as well. Okay, so it's pretty good also. So you get it. What is what is used and how it is used with proper tone or intonation and whatever for that matter. You see. So students are self-confident and not anxious, and as a result, also, and this is another factor is that we need to make your learners self-confident and not anxious. If they're anxious, as a result, their efficiency and fluency things will somehow get disturbed. You see. So the anxiety leads to minimal learning. So anxiety leads to minimal learning. So our focus should always be on the text, a discourse, and it's not really about speaking thing, and it's also on the text, a discourse, a poem, a story, a dialogue, or even a picture or a sequence of pictures for that matter. And later on, why I'm using the last one, because Stephen Krashen also, if you look at that, later on he emphasized on reading method, so mostly the text also. And if you really want to speak fluently, you need to read more, So that's what either a text or a discourse, a poem, story, dialogue, or but for that matter, watch movie and other sequence of pictures, and there are many other things. Okay, so this is where just some of the references. I think I used it from many sources, and just a few references for your let's say perusal. If you are interested, you can read some of these things. I think I have already mentioned some of this. And there's one article, interesting article also, and I think I'll share that article as well with you. Okay, so so thank you all for joining today.